So I guess my starting point, I was talking to Emma yesterday, and one of the things that we reflected on is that the first time I came to do a presentation for the group was back on the 31st of January, hosted by Dagmar at Pfizer. And who could have envisaged at that session on the 31st of January how much the world would have changed in the intervening 10 months? But I want to, I'm going to share some research, and then I'm going to talk about our response specifically to the COVID-19 crisis. But I want to do a bit of context setting right up front. And the first thing is, for those of you who this is the first time hearing me talk about our flexible working journey at the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, the first thing is to say that, we embraced flexible working 2 years ago. So for the last 2 years, our organizational position has been that every job in the organization is flexible. That is our starting point. You don't have to write a business case. You don't have to fill out a form to HR to convince us that you might want to work in an alternate work pattern. Our starting point is that every job in the organization is flexible. And so what that meant is that when we went into lockdown on the 16th of March, we were able to mobilize incredibly quickly because the whole infrastructure was already in place. What that means in terms of organizational performance is that we haven't lost a day's productivity as a result of the crisis. And in fact, this summer, we achieved 85% customer satisfaction, which is the highest we've ever achieved, in fact. So our ability to respond has been absolutely enabled by our commitment to flexibility. So that was our starting point. And what today I'm going to share is actually how the things that we put in place 2 years ago, how those messages, those ideas, those principles, some of them are principles that I shared with you back in January, and I'm going to remind you what those principles are, how they have changed and evolved, and what do we think that means going forward into the new world. Now, there's been some really interesting research during the course of the, oh, I'm not driving. Why is that? It's not moving on now. There we go. There's been some really interesting research during the course of the lockdown from lots of different organizations. And lots of you might have already seen this piece of work. It's a piece of work that I reference quite a lot. And it's a piece of research that was conducted in July of this year. So about 3 to 4 months into the global pandemic. And it's a study conducted by the Adecco Group. And the Adecco Group, oh, it's driving, it's going a little too fast for me. The Adecco Group, why is that? It's driving itself, Emma. Don't know why that is. I'm going to try and go back. No, I'm going in the wrong direction. Oh, there we go. I think I've got it. Too far. Let's stay there. I'm not going to touch it. Right. A piece of research conducted by the Adecco Group, who are the world's largest recruitment firm and are one of the long-standing partners of the FSCS. They've been our recruitment master vendor since 2014. And this study across of 8,000, more than 8,000 people in 8 countries was really looking at what does the new era of work look like? And these are the 5 key findings. So it's a really good study. I'm very happy if you haven't got copies of it. The full white paper is 130 odd pages long because it breaks it down by each of the countries where they did the research. And this is I don't know why it's just the slides, apologies, the slides are moving, seem to be moving themselves without me touching them. These are the 5 key principles. So firstly, back in January, when we met, we were talking about how do you convince organizations that flexible working is a sensible investment? Why is it the future? Actually, what this research is that flexible working is here to stay, and that hybrid working, where people just choose to spend split their time between the home and the office will be the future of work. In fact, every meeting, one of the things that we've been reflecting on at the FSCS is that in going forward, every meeting will always be like this. There will be some people in the office and there will be some people dialing in or connecting to those meetings remotely. Not only does it mean that people want greater flexibility and choice about where they work, they also want greater flexibility and choice within their working day. So the second key principle is about the end of the 9 to 5. So actually this idea of, and when we come on to talk about how our own flexible working principles have evolved, we used to say to people, well, you must have a specific piece of work that you want to do. So actually we must know what it is that you're doing when you're at home. Well, of course, the reality is that's not what we've been doing over the course of the last 9 months. And actually, it's about outcomes. Actually, what are the outcomes and the impact that you're delivering? So different ways of measuring productivity, but also people choosing to split their days differently. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. The third is around the importance, the new leadership skills that we need of leaders. So often in organizations, like the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, historically, we have valued technical expertise and technical competence, what I would call management competency, the ability to get things done, over leadership capability or transformational capability. How do you win hearts and minds? How do you support and develop your people? One of the reflections, I think, of the crisis is that actually when we've been asking the question, how are you? Perhaps maybe for the first time, actually, it's a question that we genuinely mean. And actually what we know is that organizations where leaders are able to demonstrate high emotional intelligence, greater agility, support their people, have real meaningful coaching conversations, these are the leaders who are most likely to succeed in the new world and to succeed in leading successful teams. And those teams will need new skills. We've all become Zoom, Teams, and every other platform experts over the course of this crisis. But I don't think that it's just about mastering technology. It's also, what does hybrid working mean in terms of what is the office for? What do you come into the building for? How do we split up, how do we structure our days? How do we ensure that teams remain connected to the culture of an organization? And lastly, none of that is possible without trust. And for those of you who've heard me speak before and were there in January, one of the things that I talked about in January, and I've talked about probably for about the last 6 years, is the importance of creating a high trust culture if you are to make flexible working a success. So whether employers like it or not, the world of hybrid working, I think, is here to stay. That we need to focus on outcomes as opposed to outputs. We need to think about how we equip our leaders to lead successfully in this world, the skills that we need within our teams, and most importantly, we know that actually, if you look at the Mori Veracity Index, it's one of my favorite pieces of research, which asks one single question: who do you trust? And interestingly, you won't be perhaps surprised to know that elected officials and political leaders are quite low down that scale. And actually, what a lot of the research is saying is that people are looking to employers to create the right environment. Now, at FSCS, as I said at the start, our flexible workplace vision was already in place. It's been in place for the last 2 years. We did a big piece of work during 2017, 2018, to think about our employees, the workers, the work that they do, and the workplace, the environment that they work in. Because what we want is engaged and satisfied people working productively in a modern setting. And in January, these were the 5, Emma was saying the importance of these sessions is about practical action. And these were the 5 principles that I shared. But what we have found has been successful as an organization is that, firstly, flexible working is not a problem that you have to solve. I remember the Flexpo event, the physical event, not the amazing digital event that's recently happened, but the physical event last year in Sandown, being part of a panel discussion where people in the audience were saying, how on earth do I convince my line manager that I've got a good case to do flexible working? And equally, lots of HR professionals going, how do I convince the business? How do I manage this successfully in the business, as if it's a problem? And I think we have to turn it on its head. It's not a problem that we have to solve. It is a benefit that we need to embrace. And necessity, as the saying goes, is the mother of invention. And indeed, what has happened, the crisis, as I think Emma touched on, has been a massive accelerator of the debate around flexible working. You do need to have a high trust culture to make it happen. You need the right technology to make it possible. And you also need to think about how you manage performance in this different and evolving world. So they were the 5 principles that I shared with you in January. And I want to talk about where are we now, and how has the crisis impacted those ideas, those thoughts, and those principles. So we've conducted regular pulse surveys throughout the lockdown. We did our first one right at the beginning in March. We did another one in May. We did one in August. We did one in September. And we've just, in fact, closed one this morning. So the results I'm showing today really genuinely are hot off the press. But the one that we did in August, we asked some really specific questions. So we've asked the same core questions throughout. But in August, you will remember, we had a little bit of a false start. So the government said, thank you very much for all continuing to work from home. We'd now like you to start to encourage your people back to work. And for all of the employers listening, joining the call today, you'll recall that actually we were given very little guidance by the government. We were basically told, encourage people back to work, although not always in that language. I know Ursula's on the call today and rightly posted some of the outrageous headlines that, get back to your desks or else. And at the FSCS, that wasn't the approach, you won't be surprised to know, and that we took. And we asked some really serious questions. And the first was really to understand how anxious people were feeling about returning to the office environment, and also to understand what was driving that anxiety. And you can see by the graph there that very, very high numbers of our workforce were anxious. And when you looked at this data, and actually when you looked at the free text comments underneath the survey, so this is based on about a 95% response rate, so very high response rate to this survey. And almost every single person also wrote a comment in every single space that they could. So not just ticking the box, but categorizing and clarifying what was driving their anxiety. And their anxiety was not with the office environment. They completely trusted that the FSCS was creating a COVID secure environment. They were completely anxious about traveling on public transport. And most of our employees, many of them have a 2-stage commute. So they might come into one of the major rail terminuses in London and then have to get on the tube to come to the office. Now, interestingly, you might be saying, who on earth are the 19% of people who were comfortable and excited? I can tell you that the 6% of people who were excited were all people in my team, because we've been coming into the office throughout lockdown, so 1 day a week. So we've continued to have a presence. And so actually our comfort levels, I think that explains why actually we were quite excited to welcome people back to the building. We also asked a question and said, so when you come back, how often do you think you would want to be working in the office? And you can see the numbers there. So more than half of the organization saying, I'd like to do 1 day a week and I'd like to spend the rest of my time at home. And then, the remaining 45% more than that. Now, what's interesting is that that's not completely the picture just from the numbers. Because again, an analysis of the actual commentary from colleagues is that what people were saying is 1 day a week right now, 1 day a week in the midst of the pandemic, 1 day a week when I'm concerned and anxious about why my anxiety levels are so high. But in the longer term, I envisage that it would probably be something like 2 to 3 days. And this completely chimes with the Adecco research, which had a sort of 55-45 split on average. So 55% of our time in the office, 45% of our time at home. So again, this sort of 2 to 3, 50, around the 50% mark, a sort of half and half between the home and the office. So I said in January our flexible working principles. We have a flexible working policy. It's part of our staff policy catalogue. Very, very rarely do we ever have to get it out of the drawer or take it out of the policy folder, because actually most of 9 out of 10 people in the organisation already were working flexibly, as I shared back in January, based on some pretty simple principles. And these are the principles that I shared with you in January. That's the before column. And this is what they look like now. And some of them you can see we've just got rid of. In all cases, we've made them simpler. And so again, we used to say you'll have to know what it is that you're doing when you're at home. We're like, no, you don't need to know. You don't need to tell us in advance what it is that you're doing, because you've clearly been working productively during the course of the lockdown without that sort of guidance. Now, interestingly, the one that we've had the most using the feedback from our colleagues was around this idea about what is a reasonable amount of time in the office. And actually, what we've said is it's about, out of a 35-hour week, it's on average 14 hours. So 2 days out of 5, because we have very explicitly said to our colleagues that permanent home working is not something that we see as part of our future for all manner of different reasons. We believe that the office has a hugely important part to play in our culture, but it has a different role in the future. So it is not so much a second home, it is more a hub for collaboration, creativity, getting together, building bonds and forming relationships. And also that permanent home working brings with it a set of legal requirements. So actually it does change your status. You have to have employee liability insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things I said with Emma when we were talking yesterday is that we have used our employee feedback to shape and evolve our strategy. That doesn't mean that we say yes to everything. What it means is that actually we present our rationale about why we've made the choices that we have made. And our principles are built around these 3 key areas: communication, well-being, and environment. And I just want to pick out 2 points really from here. In relation to well-being, we have an idea at the FSCS that we talk about, which is own your day. So you'll remember that I shared the research from Adecco, which talks about the end of the 9 to 5. So one of the things that we did was get rid of core hours. We used to have core hours within our contracts that said you work 35 hours a week, 9 to 5, but your core hours are 10 to 4. That's when you must be at your desk, you must be present. And we got rid of that. So in consultation with our staff, based on that August feedback, we said we're going to get rid of that. And actually, we're going to give you a parameter. We're going to give you some margins to your day. And those margins are 7 till 7. How do we come up with 7 till 7? 7 till 7 is when our office building is physically open in London. And we also felt, well, actually, that's quite a good shape of a day if you're working from home. And what we mean by owning your day is that you might decide to log on at 7 o'clock in the morning because you might be a morning person. And you might decide that you want to do a couple of hours work until 9 o'clock. And at 9 o'clock, you might want to log off and you might want to go for a run for an hour, or you might want to go to the supermarket, or you might want to drop your children at school. You might want to do the school run. I get that would be before 9 o'clock. You might then come back and after 2 hours out, you might log in at 11. You might work for a couple of hours, and that might be the hours that you do in that particular day, because we want you to own your day. Our chief executive, for example, She, in the 2 weeks that we were trying our phased return back to the office, would come into the office at 7. She would do all of her face-to-face meetings, physically face-to-face meetings with colleagues between 8 and 12, and then she would go home, have lunch, and she would log in again from home in the afternoon. So that's what we mean by owning your day. Equally, we have our 40-40 rule, and this is a sort of another way of thinking about our sort of 14 hours on average. It's 40% of our people in the building 40% of the time on average, which also allows us to maintain a COVID secure working environment. We have about 250 staff. We have about 50 further contractors, so about 300. We have 331 workstations in the organisation, in this building. 165 of those can be in use in order to be COVID secure. That's less than and that's more than our 40% number. But actually, this idea that teams work in their rotas, on average, 40% of the people in your team in the office, 40% of the time. In order to support all of that and make that happen, there is virtually nothing that we haven't done. We completely rethought our entire approach to internal communication. We've introduced a whole host of new channels and indeed increased the frequency of channels. So our CEO now messages the organisation weekly as opposed to fortnightly. We increased dependence leave to support working parents. We have created digital breakout hours, informal drop-ins. One of the things that we've been doing is also creating drop-in spaces where there is no agenda, just the opportunity for people to speak and to catch up. And I thought I talked about pulse surveys. These are the results of our pulse surveys since we started doing them. So you'll see that whilst the numbers in November, in some cases the numbers in November are slightly higher than the September numbers, we've maintained incredibly high levels of engagement throughout the lockdown. So actually people's overall happiness levels have continued to be really pretty resilient during the crisis. People continue to feel connected to the organization and to our customers and continue to feel like part of a team. And we've also in September asked some specific questions, some new questions about how well our people feel the organization has responded. So 89% of our people say we've adapted well to the emerging challenges. 90% of people say I've been clear during my priorities. And most importantly, that we've continued to live our values and they trust the decisions that have been made by our leaders. So I wanted to end with three, Emma said, end with 3 key action points. And these are mine. So firstly, I think that you need to engage. Productivity, quality, customer care are all achieved by engaging with others. You know, if I'd been allowed 5 again, I would have said in this point that the clarity and the simplicity of your messaging is absolutely central to success. In an uncertain world, employees are looking for their employers to provide as much certainty as they can. So at the beginning of lockdown in March, we said, we will not expect you to be back in the office until September at the very earliest, and we will consult you about any change in our direction of travel, which is what we did in August. We've been very, very clear that we would not take a step throughout this journey without fully consulting and engaging with our workforce. The second thing is that you then have to listen. If you engage, you have to listen to their anxieties and you have to answer them in order to build confidence. If there's one learning that I've taken from this crisis, it is the vast span of feeling in response to the crisis. I share with you the anxiety levels. Actually, even within my own team, how people are feeling and actually how people are processing lockdown and the ongoing crisis is massive, So really genuinely listening to their answers and concerns. So every time we have produced a pulse survey, we have a building back hub on SharePoint where I'm pretty confident it's the most comprehensive set of FAQs you could ask for, because every single question that we get asked, that our engagement crew raise with every team, we publish a corporate answer to it so that it's always available to staff to check in with. And thirdly, this is an action learning group, and as Emma said, good words have their place. You can do all of these things. You can engage and you can listen, but if you do not act, you will not build trust. So at the FSCS, we're ready for the new working environment. We're already doing it. And I think, and I said to Emma yesterday, it was really interesting that even in the 2 weeks that before we had to pause our phased return, we had a very giddy day where we had 40 people in the office, and I took a photograph of it and posted it on LinkedIn because I was so excited. We'd already started to think about, how do you manage meetings differently? How do you structure your day differently? Actually, if you're in the office, your diary should be free for face-to-face activities. The office is about collaboration and creativity and maintaining your culture. So engage, listen, and act. That is it from me. Oh, and it'd be remiss of me not to say that our work is currently shortlisted in 15 national awards that I'm waiting the outcome for. So on that note, I hope we've got some time for questions, Emma.